All right, shall we begin? Let's begin. So, a Gentile tells his Jewish friend, you might be my friend, but I must tell you that you will forever remain damned. And the Jew says, why? He says, well, because you crucified our Lord. Says the Jew, I'll tell you what, let's stay friends, and when you find my Lord, you can crucify him too. So today we're talking about we'll talk a little bit about the origins, or let me start out with a question. Does anybody have ideas about the origins of anti-Semitism? The origins of anti-Semitism. No? Anyone? You want to say what? We killed our. So Victor, you correctly, Elliot, it is a common belief that the origins of anti-Semitism are because of Christian anti-Semitism, accusing us of deicide, of killing their Lord and Savior, our homegrown boy. But as Elliot correctly points out, there are examples of anti-Semitism that go far back before the beginning of Christianity. And the reason why we address this question is because one of the confounding questions, the painful questions that plagues many Jewish people in the context of anti-Semitism is why? Why us? What did we do to deserve this? What's wrong with us that the Goyim hate us so much? And so we look to answers like this. Maybe they're jealous of us, right? There are many of these feelings that come up. But when we try to find the cause, try to find the reason, we look for the origins, right? So we might say it's because we're being blamed of crucifying Yoshka. And if you have the book, I invite you to turn to page 48, where we look at a text by Tacitus. Tacitus was an historian of the Roman Empire. He lived in the 1st century, and he talks about when he discusses the Roman conquest of Jerusalem, he wants to give a little bit of context to describe who the Jewish people are. And remember, this is before Christianity was a thing. It may not be before Christianity, but it's before Christianity was a thing. And he goes back to ancient history. He says, so page 48, you have text 1. Once during a plague in Egypt, which caused bodily disfigurement, King Baccharis approached the oracle of Ammon and asked for a remedy. Now, King Baccharis was a pharaoh in Egypt who lived after the Jewish people left Egypt. This is maybe a couple hundred years after the Exodus. So he approached the oracle of Ammon and asked for a remedy for his illness, whereupon he was told to purge his kingdom and to transport this race, the Hebrews, into other lands, since this race was hateful to the gods. So the Hebrews were searched out and gathered together. Then, being abandoned in the desert, while all others lay idle and weeping, one only of the exiles, Moses by name, warned them not to hope for help from gods or men, for they were deserted by both, but to trust to themselves. The Jews regard as profane all that we hold sacred. On the other hand, they permit all that we abhor. They first chose to rest on the seventh day, but after a time, they were led by the charms of indolence, that lazy people, to give over the seventh year as well to inactivity. The other customs of the Jews are base and abominable. They owe their persistence to their depravity. For the worst rascals among other peoples, renouncing their ancestral religions, I guess Gentiles or converts, always sending their tributes and contributions to Jerusalem, thereby increasing the wealth of the Jews. And so the Jews spread their tentacles into all other nations and collect from the Gentiles of the nations. Again, the Jews are extremely loyal toward one another and always ready to show compassion, but toward every other people, they feel only hate and enmity. Some of those things sound familiar? Maybe some of the things that we've heard even in Congress in the last few years. Last week. The next text is from Josephus. Josephus wrote a book called Against Apion. Apion wrote which we don't have that text, Apion's text. He wrote a book slandering the Jews, essentially. And,
It was Jewish.
Josephus, no. Apion was a Greek, and he wrote a book against the Jews. Josephus went ahead to write a polemic against Apion, and that was the name of his book, Against Apion. And he kind of tries to address the slander and the anti-Semitic lies. There's no better way to call it. The conspiracy theories against the Jews. And so by seeing Josephus's polemic, by seeing his critique and his response, we understand the conspiracy theories that were being told about the Jewish people at the time. He writes, they tell lies and invent absurd calumnies about our temple without showing any consciousness of impiety. Yet to high-minded men, nothing is more disgraceful than a lie of any description, but above all on the subject of a temple of worldwide fame and commanding sanctity. How can high-minded people, Josephus wonders, scratching his head, tell lies about something so sacred as a highly internationally regarded temple? He writes, within this sanctuary, Apion has the effrontery, the chutzpah, to assert that the Jews kept an ass's head, worshiping that animal and deeming it worthy of the deepest reverence. The fact was disclosed, he maintains, on the occasion of the spoliation of the temple by Antiochus Epiphanes. Remember him from Hanukkah? When the head made of gold and worth a high price was discovered. You kidding me?
Fake news.
Exactly.
Fake news.
Right? Now, how did it escape him that the facts convict him of telling an incredible lie? He adds a second story of Greek origin, which is a malicious slander upon us from beginning to end. In their anxiety to defend Antiochus, they have further invented to discredit us the fictitious story which follows. Apion, who is there the spokesman of others, asserts that the following story. Antiochus found in the temple a couch on which a man was reclining. And the king's entry, Antiochus, was instantly hailed by him, this man on the couch, with adoration, as about to procure him profound relief. So when Antiochus comes in, this man goes falling at the king's knees, stretched out his right hand and implored him to set him free. And this man on the couch said that he was a Greek, and that while traveling about the province for his livelihood, he was suddenly kidnapped by men of a foreign race and conveyed to the temple, where he was shut up and seen by nobody, but was fattened on feasts of the most lavish description. At first, these unlooked-for attentions deceived him and caused him pleasure. He thought he was happy. I'm getting fed so well. Suspicion followed, then consternation. Then he started to get worried. Why are they feeding me all the time? Finally, on consulting the attendants who waited upon him, he heard of the unutterable law of the Jews, for the sake of which he was being fed. The practice was repeated annually at a fixed season. They would kidnap a Greek foreigner, fatten him up for a year, and then lead him to a certain wood where they slew him, sacrificed his body with their customary ritual, partook of his flesh, while immolating the Greek, swore an oath of enmity to the Greeks. The remains of their victim were then thrown into a pit. The man stated that he had now but a few days left to live, and implored the king out of respect for the gods of Greece to defeat this Jewish plot upon his lifeblood and to deliver him from his miserable predicament. So this is the story that Josephus is quoting. Fools must be refuted not by arguments, but by facts. Here then we have rank impiety at its worst, and a gratuitous lie designed to mislead persons who do not trouble to investigate the facts. Yikes. So let's think back to some of these stories and think back to some of the recurring themes, anti-Semitic motifs that we hear throughout history. Any familiar tropes that you heard in these stories? No? There was no mention of Jewish noses here, but there was some mention of other familiar anti-Jewish things. No? So referring to the killing of the killing of non-Jews for ritual purposes by Jews, the blood libel essentially, right? That's an old one.
Almost like a homogeneous society that not inclusive, isolationist.
Yes, we care only about ourselves. We stick to our own. That's yeah. Mm-hmm. We're out to take advantage.
Oh, and the money one too.
Yeah.
That we're very money driven.
Yeah, money hungry, sucking the money away from the goyim. Yeah.
When I worked in the Bowery Stadium, one of the guys, what I do, guys tried to say, you know what I think about this to me? All those Jews. And I said, no, I'm a Jew? He said, no, you're not a Jew. So what do you want, a membership card?
So, yeah. So the Tacitus brings up a common one, going back to the Egypt one, right? This idea that Egypt has problems and all of our misfortunes are because of the Jews, which is which was on every page of the Stürmer, on the Nazi rag. And the truth is, even today, people who talk about the Jews being responsible for this problem or that problem. I mean, if you search the dark corners of the web, you'll find people blaming COVID on the Jews.
Throughout history, every country we've been kicked out of that.
Yeah. Another common one is that the Jews are lazy. Right, that's the resting on the Sabbath. I mean, that one repeated itself a lot throughout history. The idea that Jews are obsessed with money, we mentioned, that they've been rejected by the gods. The idea that that the Jews were forsaken by gods and men in the desert, right? And this idea that the Jews are somehow spiritually bereft, needing salvation, or not deserving of salvation. So how we can feel Josephus's frustration at these conspiracy stories and at the fake news, and he's trying to set the record straight. I wonder what he thought he was going to accomplish by this. How do you address conspiracy theories? How do you debunk conspiracy theories? And a classic another conspiracy theory against the Jews, text 3, was the one that blamed the Jews for September 11th. And the crazy thing is that Al-Qaeda came out explicitly taking credit for it, but it didn't stop the rumor that the Jews were responsible. On September 18th, this is the second paragraph, text 3. On September 18th, an editor for a website known as the Information Times posted a message claiming that, quote, the terrorist government of Israel cannot be ruled out as a suspect. The editor did not identify a motive or provide evidence in support of his allegation. In words, he was simply raising a reasonable question. And of course, anybody who shuts down the reasonable question will be seen as part of the conspiracy to cover up the truth that no one wants to talk about. You know, it's kind of like the that move in the dog in the wag the dog. Oh. No. That movie with Wag the Dog, where he gets with tail wag the dog, right? And they want to pretend that there's a war, so they get up there and they say, we want to deny all reports that there was that the United States of America is engaging in conflict with some fictitious country, and of course that creates the news. So here, this it's such a twisted move. It's a reasonable question. We shouldn't rule out the possibility that Israel is a suspect in 9/11. 5 days later, Al Manar, a TV station based in Lebanon, stated that Mossad had indeed warned 4,000 Jews who worked at World Trade Center to stay home on September 11th. And within days, that rumor appeared in newspapers and electronic listservs across the world. People continued to believe the lie, despite the fact that about 18% of the known dead were identified in obituaries as Jews. That's a highly disproportionate number of people. So, this is the nature of this, the virulence and the tenacity, the staying power of these conspiracy theories are confounding. It's hard to understand. A Jewish scholar, Menachem Zemba, who lived from 1883 to 1943, wrote the following, text 4. He said, there are those who seek to identify, this is the absurdity of anti-Semitism, is how it contradicts itself. There are those who seek to identify legitimate causes for the hatred of Jews. However, reality has shown that there is no legitimate reason. Anti-Semitism has no justifiable cause. The haters simply choose to hate God's people. This is demonstrated by the fact that Jews are hated for being capitalists and also for being socialists. They're hated for being overly ambitious and sharp-minded, and also because they are parasitic and indolent. They are hated because they are too religious and conservative, and also because they are progressive and secular. Reasons for this hatred are consistently contradictory and have not an ounce of logic behind them. So, in each society, the anti-Semites choose the issue that will inflame the masses and make that the hat they hang on, that hook that they hang their hat on, in order to be opposed, to be in opposition to the Jewish people, which is why we end up with these contradictory claims. So, to summarize what we've said so far, anti-Semitism has been on record in Western literature for thousands of years. And the accusations made about the Jews continue to persist. They persist in a way that's illogical, and they contradict themselves in a way that's illogical. So at this point, we might throw up our hands and say, what are we going to do? This doesn't make sense at all. So first of all, the upshot here so far is that can we ask what is the cause of anti-Semitism? And so far, any answer that we would suggest giving doesn't make sense. Because even if you say it's jealousy, for example, well, you find that Jews are hated for being too lazy or for being too poor. So you'll always find a contradictory outgrowth, a contradictory strain of anti-Semitism, which contradicts the previous strain. But so we'll get to Haman in a moment. We're actually going to bring Haman in tonight. Shakespeare too is a good question, right? So going back to Josephus, though, Josephus seems to try to address the claims of anti-Semitism with facts, and that's what he says. The only way to counteract fake news is by bringing out the facts. Tell me, does that work? Was Josephus successful? Hardly. And the truth is that there is a power, there is kind of an immunity that conspiracy theories have to any kind of facts. Conspiracy theories are immune to facts, because what happens is, take for example, here's Deborah Lipstadt, who's an expert in anti-Semitism, text 5. She says, some people insist that the moon landings took place on a stage set somewhere in the American West, right? So you can bring reams of scientific evidence to the contrary. And when you bring those reams of scientific evidence, you bring studies of universities and facts and governmental papers, and they'll say, well, yeah, there's a whole infrastructure of powerful elites who are conspiring together to cover up the truth that the moon landing is fake. Right, and if you bring university studies, they'll say, yeah, they're hooked up with the government. They take money, and they'll show you the connection between the university and the government and how they're taking money and government grants, and they're hooked up, and it's all one big conspiracy, right? If you so by bringing proof to contradict the conspiracy theories, all you do is present yourself as somebody who is a member of the conspiracy. And so this is the immunity, the illogical immunity of conspiratorial thinking. That's right. So so she concludes, to try to defeat an irrational supposition, especially when it's firmly held by its proponents with a rational explanation, is virtually impossible. Any information that does not correspond with the conspiracy theorists' preferred social, political, or ethnic narratives is ipso facto false. Social scientists have described such theories as having a self-sealing quality that makes them particularly immune to challenge. And if you've talked to anybody, and the truth is, in a polarized society, we are familiar. Anyone who's tried to argue about something or another in the last few years has seen this self-sealing quality, and it's unfortunate that it seeped its way into normal dialogue as well. But we have to take a step aside for a moment. Just when we use the word anti-Semitism, it's important to clarify where that term comes from and to put it into proper perspective. Anti-Semitism was created by a German named Wilhelm Marr. And he founded the Anti-Semites League, the first organization devoted exclusively to promoting political anti-Semitism, which was a departure from the traditional German religious Jew hatred. So Marr was presenting now not anti-Jew for religious reasons, but anti-Semites for religious or cultural reasons. And his idea was Mar's organization reflected his secular racism, which existed inconsistently alongside his own religious anti-Semitism. So he says that I'm here to talk about the Jewish problem from a secular point of view, but my goal, he says, is to free Christianity from the yoke of Judaism. Anyway, so he contradicts himself. Mar coined the term Antisemitismus, anti-Semitism, which for him denoted a secular racial hatred of Jews, and he used the word anti-Semitism to make Jew hatred seem rational and sanctioned by science, polite. This was, I don't hate the Jews. I just think that our cultures that our races are incompatible. Right? So the absurdity of anti-Semitism as it is means that we should, if as haphazard and chaotic and self-contradictory as anti-Semitism is, it shows then that it's strange, it's inappropriate to refer to anti-Semitism as an idea, because it isn't an idea. It's not coherent. There's no logic. There's no systematic thinking involved. So let's look at what Jews called what we call anti-Semitism before the term anti-Semitism was coined. Gluckel of Hamlin, it's a Jewish woman, a Jewish businesswoman in Germany, who lived in the 17th century, end of the 17th and beginning of the 18th century. And she wrote a diary in Yiddish, which we have full text today, Memoirs of Gluckel of Hamlin. It's a fascinating read and gives an insight into Jewish life in ways that are so much the same, and yet in such a different time. And they're so vivid and so heartfelt, and so really, there's a special spiritual quality to Gluckel's memoirs. Highly recommended reading. She lived in Hamburg, and in her memoirs, she writes of a story that took place in 1687. A non-Jewish resident of Hamburg was sentenced to death for murdering 2 innocent Jews. Okay, so justice is served by the German government. Non-Jew murders 2 innocent Jews and is sentenced to death. But this was too much for the Gentiles, the Jew-hating Gentiles of Hamburg, who couldn't allow one of them to lose his life over nothing. And on the day of the sentencing and execution, there was intense anti-Semitic agitation among the masses. And this is what she writes. On the day the murderer was, but I want you to listen to the word for the word that she uses to describe anti-Semitism. Okay? So listen out for that. On the day the murderer was sentenced to death, there was a commotion in Hamburg that had not been seen there for 100 years over any man sentenced to death. The lives of all Jews were in danger due to the extreme rishus, the evil wickedness that has been roused. Did you get the word for anti-Semitism? I'll read it again. The commotion in Hamburg that put the lives of all Jews in danger due to the extreme rishus, evil wickedness that had been roused. So what's the word for anti-Semitism that she says? Evil wickedness, rishus. Rishus is a good word. It's a good Yiddish word. Rishus. It's actually a Hebrew word. The root of the word is Rasha. Rasha. Rasha, rishut. Rishut. Right? But in Yiddish, rishus means just plain old evil. Right? Wickedness. It's like if somebody somebody has snacks and he wouldn't share it with anyone, you would say, "What's with this dishes? Share your snacks." He walked over to a boy walked over to another kid, and he sees him walking and he just trips him for the laughs. "What's with the dishes? You just tripped a kid for no reason." Yeah, that's how you use this word, right? Dishes. But the deep meaning of the word is that it's real evil, real wickedness, right? So this is how Gluckel refers to anti-Semitism. She doesn't dignify it with calling it by anything other than it is. It's simply evil wickedness. So, for lack of a better term, we use the word anti-Semitism, but if we're going to orient our thinking correctly, we should call it in our minds for what it is. It is wickedness. It's evil. It's a dark force. It's bad behavior. It's bad behavior. So we talk about and I think this is really, I don't want to harp on it too much, but I don't think you can harp on it too much. The difference between talking about the problem of anti-Semitism versus versus people behaving badly, right? And those are different things.
Yeah, I think people are desensitized to the word anti-Semitism. So generalized and overused. I completely agree with Cole with we're sugarcoating it by saying anti-Semitism.
Right? It's simply wicked. It's people behaving badly. And behaving badly is a gentle way to put it. Vicious. People being wicked. People being evil. Which we do. People do that. And it goes in the category, the problem of the murder rate is an academic discussion, right? There are evil people doing bad things. Different discussion, right? So, and it's much more consistent with the idiocy and the absurdity of the problem, right?
There's also an accountability.
Wickedness holds who is accountable when it's wickedness, right?
Right.
The anti-Semite is the one who's the wicked person is the one who's held accountable. Yeah. Yeah. I believe in anti-Semitism, right? I'm an anti-Semitism believer. I subscribe to the theories that the Jews are problematic. That's not what this is. Right. So this is not subscribing to theories. This is simply giving in to the base tendencies of people who lack moral clarity. No. So I'll tell you a story. The premier of Poland, right after World War I, was discussing his country's problems with President Wilson. He says, "If our demands are not met at the conference table, I can foresee serious trouble in my country. Why, my people will be so irritated that many of them will get drunk and go out and massacre the Jews." "And what will happen if your demands are granted?" said President Wilson. "Why, my people will be so happy that they'll get drunk and go out and massacre the Jews." No, he was not. Listen, look what happened. This was World War I, right? It wasn't 50 years later that 35 years later, whatever, I can't count. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So, why the Jews? So we still have the persistent question of why the Jews. It's absurd and it's ancient, but and we want to find an answer, but at the same time, we don't want to justify it. So back to back to trying to analyze it. What might explain the persistence of anti-Semitism? Well, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks wrote as follows. Page 60, text 8. There has been an almost endless set of speculations about what the cause of anti-Semitism actually is. So here's for the psychologists. Some have seen it in psychological terms. Maybe it's displaced fear, the externalization of inner conflict, projected guilt, the creation of a scapegoat, right? People, psychologists on this, you correct me if I'm wrong, okay? Psychologists talk about how sometimes when people have feelings that are too complicated for them to be able to handle, they put it onto others. They describe others as having those feelings or those problems. Projection, externalizing are different ways in which people misidentify problems that are going on inside of them as going on inside of others. So-and-so hates me. I really hate myself, but I think that I'm unlovable and therefore other people hate me, right? Displaced, right? So that's an example of that. Yeah. Thank you, Phyllis. I'm so glad that I have you here so that I can feel comfortable that if I say something wrong, you'll correct me. Okay. So that's the psychological explanation. There is the sociopolitical explanation, which are that Jews were a group who could conveniently be blamed for the economic resentments, social unrest, class conflict, or destabilizing change. We were an identifiable people on the periphery. And therefore, it was easy to pin the problems on us. And others view it through the prism of culture and identity, that Jews were the stereotyped outsiders, again, the identifiable on the periphery, against whom a group could define itself. How does an American know that they're an American? How does an Italian know that they're an Italian? So they have to find somebody nearby who they can say, we are not them. So you find, for example, that the English do this for the Irish. English have jokes about the Irish. The Swedes have jokes about the not the Norse. The Swedes and the I'm mental blank, right? But that's how in Canada they make fun of people from the people from the East make fun of people from the West. But it's much easier to have a people who are in your presence who you can define yourself against. And so the Jews served as an identifiable culture that we could say, we are Italians, we're not Jews. Others, noting the concentration of anti-Semitism among various faiths, Christianity and Islam, that trace their descent to Abraham. Nachamal. This one's deep. You with me, guys? Some people noticed that anti-Semitism seems to be concentrated in the two major faiths, Christianity and Islam, that both come from Judaism. So they say that this is a manifestation of the Freudian myth of Oedipus, that we seek to kill the person who gave birth to us. Right? So there's the Freudian explanation for anti-Semitism. So we have the psychological explanation, we have the socio-political explanation, we have the cultural explanation, we have the religious/Freudian explanation, the psychoanalytic explanation. So he concludes by saying, it would be strange indeed if so complex a phenomenon did not give rise to multiple explanations. Do any of these resonate with you? Did any of these ring true for you?
They all do, but the irony is, you don't have to just look at Jews. Look at how any go with. I mean, look at any minority group in any place in the world, and you'll find the masses picking on the minority groups.
Yeah.
So,
Right. So all of these things are true, right? So let's acknowledge something, right? Psychological phenomena are real. People do act based on displaced fear and externalization of conflict, projecting guilt. This is stuff that happens every day. It's real, right? Sociopolitical scapegoats are also real. I mean, not naming names, but every party has a socio-political scapegoat. Everyone, right? For this side, it's the elites, it's the cultural elites, and for this side, it's the unwashed and uneducated, right? And for this side, it's people from the South, and from this side, it's people from the East, right? They all have problems. They all have some. So the socio-political phenomena is real. Cultural identity, identifying yourself culturally in contrast to another culture, is real, right? The Oedipus is arguably real, right? Listen, Freud had a lot of Hasidim, right? Who understood a lot of what happens in the world based on this interpretation of the Greek myth of Oedipus, right? So all of these phenomena are real. No one's denying that. The question is it an adequate explanation for Jew hatred? That's the question.
Well, the weird thing also with Jews, and this is what you're saying, is if you ask a Jewish person in another country, I've been in lots of different countries. So you talk to a Jew in any other country, even in the United States, and you ask, where are you? They'll say they're Jew first before American. 9 times out of 10, 8 times out of 10, 7 times out of 10. If you ask somebody who's Italian or Catholic, Christian, they'll say American. I'm an American Italian. We associate our religion with our ethnicity, and that creates some of flipping it back the other way. People pick up on that.
Right. So this brings me back to the pact, the unwritten what do we call it? The unwritten agreement that the Jew in the Western world believes he has with the Gentile. And that is that I won't be too Jewish and you won't be too anti-Semitic, right? So this is what I really want to move to now. And in order to do that, we'll talk about the older hatred of Jews, even than Tacitus and Josephus, or not Josephus, but what's his name? The Apion. So even older than that is Haman in the book of Esther. So we know the story. Haman goes to King Ahasuerus to bring to his attention that there is a certain people scattered and spread out among all the peoples throughout the provinces of your kingdom. And he asks for permission to destroy them. And he recognizes that destroying the Jews would be an economic blow to Ahasuerus' tax revenue. So he says, I will cover the loss in your taxes by offering you 10,000 silver cubes to compensate for that loss. The king says, nah, keep the money, do what you want with the Jews. And so the Talmud tries to understand what's going on here. And the Talmud explains by way of a parable, which doesn't seem to explain very much at all. Text 9, page 61. We can use a parable to gain insight into the respective positions of Ahasuerus and Haman. They are similar to two individuals, one who has a tall mound in his field and the other has a ditch in his field. The owner of the ditch mused to himself, "Ah, I have this hole in my field. It's really annoying. If I could only get that guy to sell me the dirt from his ditch, that I could fill up my hole." He wants that guy's mound to fill up his ditch. And the owner of the mound is standing in his field and he's saying, "I got this mound in the middle of my field and it's in the way, it's blocking everything. If I could only get that guy to let me, I would pay him to let me move my dirt into his ditch." So not long afterward, the two met. The owner of the ditch said, "Sell me your mound." And the owner of the mound says, "Take it for free. You'll do me a favor." So this is the Talmud trying to explain why Haman and why Achashverosh was happy to allow Haman to destroy the Jews. So this doesn't really explain much. It indicates that there is some mutual benefit, but it doesn't explain what it is. Another question. Why refer to Haman as trying to fill a ditch? He's not trying to fill a ditch. He's trying to get rid of something, right? You're talking about filling the ditch. So one way of understanding this teaching of Talmud is that it's describing two different types of anti-Semitism. One is a mound and one is a ditch. What is a mound? A mound is something in the way. These are the Jews who are stopping me from accomplishing what I want to accomplish. I can't get ahead in real estate because Jews control the market. I can't buy a nursing home because Jews control, right? There's Jews in the way, right? This is the mound phenomenon, where the Gentile wants the Jew hater, the Russia, wants the Jews to be gone so that he can move freely. This would be a sad. If this was the whole of anti-Semitism, it would be sad. I mean, it's particularly, I have heard this from successful people who, when others are jealous of their success, and they get blamed, they feel blamed by the others for this failure, blames me for their failure because I'm in their way, right? And I'm not in their way. I'm just doing my best, and I have been blessed by God to be successful, right? So that's very sad to feel that way. It's frustrating, it's painful, but that's not the whole story. There is a whole other half to anti-Semitism, and that is the ditch mentality. The ditch mentality isn't the Jew as an obstacle. It is the Jew exposing a hole in my life. The Jew exposing some kind of void, some kind of empty space. And when you read the words of Haman, I couldn't put it more clearly than Haman put it himself. Text 10. Haman came home and he told them about his magnificent wealth and his many sons and how the king had promoted him. This is a direct quote from the book of Esther. And how the king is from the book of Esther. Yeah. And Haman told them about his magnificent wealth and his many sons and how the king had promoted him and advanced him above all the other officials in royal courtiers. What is more, said Haman, Queen Esther personally prepared a feast. And besides the king, she did not invite anyone but me. And tomorrow, too, I'm invited by her along with the king. So Haman is describing himself at the top of the world. But all of this means nothing to me each time I see Mordechai the Jew sitting at the palace gate. I can't enjoy what I have. There's a hole in my field because when I look at you, I see the hole in my field. Not you're blocking me from being successful. Your presence makes me feel empty. Haman was the most powerful person in Achashverosh's kingdom. And all that Mordechai did, Achashverosh commanded that everyone needs to bow down before Haman wherever he goes. And everyone agreed to do that besides from Mordechai the Jew, who refused to kneel or bow. And this infuriated Haman. So, but here's the thing, the nuance, what I want you to really listen for is, it isn't that Haman was angry that he wasn't being bowed down to. It wasn't that he felt disrespected. That wasn't it. Because you deal with that, right? He could get a soldier to push Mordechai down, right? That wouldn't do it. The fact that Mordechai refused to bow down to him made him feel worthless. That's different. And that's what he says. All of this means nothing to me each time I see Mordechai the Jew sitting at the palace gate. How do we understand this from a Jewish perspective? What is the Megillah? What is the book of Esther trying to teach us? Haman, when Haman saw Mordechai refusing to bow down to him, he saw a man who lives for principles and who lives for purpose and who had dedicated his life to the service of God, not the service of men. This and who was willing to sacrifice himself, who was willing to go to great lengths, great inconveniences to live by his principles. And this reminded, now contrast this with Haman, who has climbed over bodies to get to where he got to. And so Haman cannot live with himself when he sees the living example of a person who lives by principles and is willing to sacrifice for those principles. And so the Talmud is saying that that Haman, seeing Mordechai, exposed the ditch. The difference is, am I a person who is needy, who needs things to make me happy, or am I a person who is here to accomplish a purpose?
All Jews, the moral of the story is we should put all non-Jews in psychotherapy.
So this is the problem.
Because you can't solve that problem.
This is
from within.
Okay, good, very good. So now you said what you said sounds helpful, but anyone who's ever dealt in the world of psychotherapy knows that what you've just said is a very painful statement, because you cannot put someone else into psychotherapy. A person can only put themselves into psychotherapy. You can tell them to go to psychotherapy, but unless they want to show up and do the work, they're not going to be helped.
It can physically be that, doesn't mean
Right.
mentally.
So we are left at this point in our discussion, we are left recognizing that we are really helpless. Okay. But let's just follow the theme once again. There are two ways of looking at the world, right? There is the human way of looking at the world, which is that I am here as a consumer of goods, which means that I am a needy person. I need things to make me happy in order to be successful, I need to consume. That is my goal in life, to consume. And the Jewish way of looking at life, the spiritual, godly way of looking at life, is that I am here as a provider of well-being. I am here as a provider of spiritual light. So somebody who has dedicated their entire life to the consumption of goods, when they're confronted by the possibility of living as a provider of light, their entire life suddenly becomes a ditch, it becomes an empty void. And this causes Haman. Now, there is a healthy way to respond to that, and that's to be inspired. But people who aren't spiritually healthy often displace that inner feeling of emptiness onto the source of their feeling of emptiness. And they'll go ahead and they'll say, those Jews are rotten because I feel rotten next to them. And you know what? You're right. You're living a rotten, empty life compared to them. So now we understand why the Talmud is so cryptic, because to write this explicitly is not safe, right? So the Talmud writes this kind of, it's not good for your health, right? The Talmud writes this in a coded language to give across this very important message. Now, why do we need to know this? Okay. So the reason we need to know this is because the first step in our outsmarting anti-Semitism and our overcoming anti-Semitism of our internalizing the anti-Semitism is recognizing what's the dynamic here, okay? The dynamic here is not in all cases, because the Talmud says there is a true anti-Semitism that comes from a person feeling like others are an obstacle. And yes, sometimes, you meet you encounter competition and you could resent your competition. You know what? That's normal. It's understandable. Sucks for us, should I say? It happens, right? But so that's, you deal with that, you don't deal with that. You move on from that. But this other element of anti-Semitism is of the ditch analogy actually has the potential for real spiritual work on our part. And it reminds us the mound Jew hatred, feeling like an obstacle, generally doesn't lend itself to internalization. When I am successful, okay, and other people are jealous of my success, or I don't use the jealous. If I am good at what I do, and other people are not succeeding at competing with me, right? So that's the mound analogy. Will I slow down my game? Not really. Being in that situation, it's uncomfortable, it's awkward, but we don't internalize that. We do tend to internalize the ditch type of anti-Semitism, right? And that's important, because it's not okay to tell the victim of bullying that they need to change in order to stop the bully from misbehaving.
We know that's true because in most countries that we come to, in a very short period of time, one generation, if not even the first generation, we become lawyers, doctors, and Indian chiefs, and we leave you in the rearview mirror.
Yeah.
But we have no choice, because they won't allow us to be artisans. We can't work like they do because they don't want us there.
Right. This is back, right.
And we get through jobs that we can excel in.
Right. Which is why so many Jews, by the way, which is why so many frum Jews are in real estate and in nursing homes. Were in the shmata business, because these were and still are, for Jews who don't want to be in the anti-Semitic elite university world that's opposed to Jewish principles in the deepest of ways, right? So that means that we end up in these. But again, let's just clarify the differentiation between the ditch and how we react to that, and the mound and how we react to that. Being successful and other people being jealous of our resenting us for our accomplishments is not something we usually internalize. We don't feel bad. Generally, we don't feel bad for our success. Certainly men don't. Huh? Right. We might even, it's a little awkward, but you deal with it. It happens in business. Everyone goes through it. The mound anti-Semitism, the ditch, however, when we are around people who displace their feelings of worthlessness onto us, that's something that we do tend to feel. We tend to absorb that, and that's very dangerous. And Rabbi Sachs again says, Jews must fight anti-Semitism, but never internalize it, which is easier said than done. If you're hated, it's natural to believe that you're hateful, that the defect lies in you, but it rarely does. Hate exists in the mind of the hater, not in the person of the hated. Just like being angry is taking poison, hoping that the other person will die, right? Hatred is not in the body of the hated, it's in the mind of the hater. Jews have faults, and Judaism is a religion of self-criticism and repentance. And so it's in our culture to criticize ourselves. But those faults have nothing to do with those of which they're accused by their enemies. Anti-Semitism tells us about anti-Semites, not about Jews. One of the mistakes made by good, particularly by good, honorable, and reflective Jews was to believe that since Jews were hated because they were different, they should try as far as possible not to be different, not to be too Jewish.
And
So some converted. My own namesake, Felix Mendelssohn, was a converted Jew. I'm not related to him because none of his descendants are Jewish. Some converted, others assimilated, yet others reformulated Judaism to eliminate as far as possible all that made Jews and Judaism distinctive. You want to hear an irony? You know the scarf tallis, right? Where did that come from? To wear a tallis as a shawl around your neck. Where does this come from? Huh? It came from the Christians, because the Christians wear a stole, right? The Catholic priests wears a stole. So the Jews wanted to fit in. So they had the rabbis dress up in something that looked like the clergy. And so they have them wearing a tallis that looks kind of like a stole. So it should be acceptable for the goyim. Question is, where did the stole come from? It came from the tallis. I mean, that's my take on it. I think it's reasonable. But there's an example of reformulating Judaism to be acceptable, to fit in gentle society. And when these things failed, as they did, not only in 19th century Germany and Austria, but also in 15th century Spain, some internalized this failure. Thus was born the tortured psychology known as Jewish self-hatred. And I, as an identifiable Jew, have experienced this, where I have been accused by fellow Jews of arousing anti-Semitism by walking around as such an obvious Jew. You're causing problems for us with the goyim, with the way you look and with the way you behave. When you and you're as a teenager, right? As a Jewish teenager, you dressed like this and the way you behave, it's your fault that the goyim hate us, that we have problems with our Gentile neighbors. You know, playing ball in the street with a yarmulke on. What do you expect, that the goyim should like us? Which is nonsense. Because I grew up in a city where all the kids played in the street. That wasn't the issue, right? And this is particularly, especially, I would say, in my experience in Europe. European Jews particularly have this issue. Down south, I wouldn't know.
That's the problem. You don't know.
Yeah.
Because they've assimilated.
Right, but I'm talking about even among religious Jews in Europe, and I've spent time in a few European countries in Jewish communities there. That's a pathology that happens where this feeling that we have to be careful. And again, this is not to say that there isn't place to take security measures and to make sure to avoid being a target in a strategic manner. But from an identity standpoint, from a behavioral standpoint, there is a danger of internalizing anti-Semitism to the point of becoming a self-hating Jew, to the point of becoming critical of oneself through the eyes of goyim, through the eyes of Gentiles. So So some of these, so as we said, as Jonathan Sachs said, some ways in which this has taken place is people completely assimilating, changing their names. I mean, how many? It's not uncommon, and we know of people who have changed their names because they didn't want to appear too Jewish. Others took it to a lesser extreme. Maybe we should give up on some of the traditions of Judaism, like kosher or Shabbos. Others argue that we should be careful not to speak of Jews as the chosen people, because that's asking for trouble. Others said that maybe we should encourage intermarriage. Look, if we celebrate intermarriage, then we will reduce anti-Semitism. All of these are examples of internalizing the hate. Look, it's not to say that assimilation doesn't have its own causes. There is the drive to success that, or simply eventually a person loses their identity and assimilates naturally. But there is also this proactive assimilation and the intentional assimilation in the hopes of being accepted more by Gentiles. Yeah. Would you have gotten where you had gotten?
Well, one of my problems, my last name is Arnold.
Right.
I would have been around with like it was original. I wouldn't have to explain to people that I am Jewish.
And that's something that I want to get to soon. So I want you to hold that thought. What happens when we have to explain? What happens when we are identifiably Jewish? So the thing is that these attempts were unsuccessful, because look what happened. When the Jews of Germany, who suffered for 1,000 years at the hands of religious Jew hatred, when those Jews became so assimilated that the religious claim of anti-Semitism was no longer relevant, a new type of anti-Semitism came up, which was the racial anti-Semitism, right? So making that kind of obsequience before the Gentiles and bowing down to them and trying to get accepted by them, it worked for a minute until they came up with a new way of rejecting us, which, by the way, goes back to the contradictory nature of anti-Semitism. It's just going to look for a new way to exist. When we have outsmarted it, it goes again and outsmarts us again.
The Germans look for people that have something in their background so that they.
Right, because it was a racial anti-Semitism. And the same is, and we'll talk about this in a future class, next class actually, which is the new anti-Semitism, which is now that Jews are no longer religious, by statistically, and the racial living in a melting pot, in a cultural melting pot, is no longer racial anti-Semitism is no longer acceptable. Now we have political anti-Semitism against the Jewish state, right? So that would be the new form of how Jews can think, but of how Jews are identified as targets by, but it's the central point that we're trying to drive home here is we should not internalize that there is something wrong with us because they have a problem. We don't change because they have a ditch in their yard. And again, it's natural to try, especially for a Jewish person who believes in themselves. See, there's like a flaw in this mission-oriented culture where we see ourselves as bringers of light and inspiration, is that we want to accommodate and include. And in so doing, we want to be included and accommodated. And so we try to engage in this kind of, we try to whitewash ourselves in order to be included and in order to be inclusive. And which really comes from our deep potential and culture and inner sense of having something to offer.
It also goes back to Abraham.
It does go back to Abraham.
Right?
That's exactly right.
Abraham had Hashem on the side. What does he do? First opportunity that he gets, well, not first opportunity, but he gets scared with Sarah. What does he do? That's my sister. He hides his Jewishness.
You could put it that way.
It's genetically right it's in our DNA.
Yeah. So look at this great story from Abraham Twersky, right? Dr. Abraham Twersky writes, page 66, text 12. I was once traveling on a bus, dressed in my customary garb, wearing a broad black hat and a black frock coat. A man approached me and said in Yiddish, I think it's shameful that your appearance is so different. There's no need for Jews in America to be so conspicuous with long beards and black hats. I'm sorry, mister, I said to the man. I'm not Jewish, I'm Amish, and this is how we dress. Oh, he says, it's so lovely how you keep your traditions and your culture. I didn't mean to offend you. You should be proud of preserving your traditions. No, after he got off the bus, he said, you should be ashamed of yourself.
Just reminds me of that movie with
The Amish. Yeah. 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 Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's common, right? It has been common. Look, it's understandable, but we have to call it what it is. It is internalizing anti-Semitism. And we also can't judge past generations. In those times, it might have been self-preservation in those times. Today it is not. Today it is not. So if we ask the question, do Jews belong in America? Do Jews have a right to live in America? If the answer to that question is yes, then that means that Jews should be in America as Jews. And that means that Jews should be in America with yarmulke and with tzitzis and with mezuzahs on their door and with identifiable Jewish names. Which is why on my children's passports, they don't have English names. My son is Yehuda on his passport. My daughter is Sterne Sarah on her passport. There's no Gentile names there because Jews have a right to live in America. Not only we have a right to live in America, we have a sacred calling while living in America. Until by hook or by crook, we end up in the land of Israel, God putting us here gives us a sacred calling. And for that reason, we need to be identifiable as Jews. And so this is what I think the calling of the Jewish people is. And that is that if you think about the times where we do have an impact, when do Jews have an impact as Jews? It isn't when we are not identifiable as Jews. We have the impact when we are identifiable as Jews and we are identifiable as good people. Yeah.
When he started his house in Hong Kong, he had a long correspondence with the couple. And he put a credit on trading on the list. And thinking, why? Every time in the early editions of Oliver Twist, every time Franklin is mentioned, he's mentioned as Franklin the Jew. Your Sykes is a far more reprehensible character. Why don't you say Bill Sykes
The Christian?
And this dialogue spilled over into the Jewish part.
Hmm.
And I personally think a great deal of credit. He realized regular culture, and made a work which I probably know, I mean, it's not trained, it's a character that comes out with any integrity.
Hmm. Hmm.
Where's the name of the Jewish account?
Yeah, well, some so as I discussed earlier in shul, I discussed in the class bin Chamara, stereotypes have truth to them. That's why they exist, right? The reason, and this also relates to some of what we're talking about tonight, the problem with stereotypes is that we often only know the stereotype. Meaning, if we know that Jews are, we know all the stereotypes of Jews, right? So then why aren't we anti-Semites? We agree with those stereotypes. We know they're true in many cases. So why aren't we anti-Semites? The answer is because we know the whole Jew. We know that in addition to maybe being a little stingy, or maybe being a little pushy, or maybe interrupting a little, this is a good person who has a beautiful family, who has a beautiful way of life, and has so many good qualities about them. And when we know them well, we understand that these qualities, let's say the pushing, the interrupting, comes from a strong mind, comes from an inquisitive nature, comes from a vigorous dialogue, a love of discussion, right? Curiosity, right? Somebody who's stingy might also be very fastidious, might be very concerned, might be very organized, might be very particular and very principled with money, and would never cheat anybody because they count everything carefully, right? When you see the whole picture, the stereotype is part of that picture. So the accountant, the Jewish accountant. So when you see the whole picture, right? So this is, I think, one to bring the story and as an example, a man named Muhammad Dajani. Muhammad Dajani was born in 1946 in Jerusalem, and he became a Fatah operative. He worked for the Palestinian terrorist group Fatah. In 2014, this same now former terrorist led a trip of Palestinian students to Auschwitz, the first time in history. And he was fired from Al-Quds University for doing this. But he was asked, how did you change from being an avowed hater of Jews, committed to their destruction, to bringing a group of Palestinian students to Auschwitz to educate them about Jewish history? And he told the following story in 2019. He says, I'd started going with my father to Hadassah Hospital for chemotherapy. His father needed chemotherapy. And to my shock, I started to observe that doctors and nurses treated him as a patient. The doctors were very friendly, and the nurses were also. He would bring them fruit and flowers and chocolate. And I noticed in the hospital that Palestinians are also receiving treatment. That actually awakened me to a great extent to the humanity in the other, and it also awakened my humanity. And this was the starting point. So I want to analyze what happens here, okay? If every doctor in the hospital was treating this Palestinian terrorist, but had taken off their yarmulke, had changed their name to an Arab name to fit in with their neighbors, had disavowed publicly their Jewish religion, this Palestinian, this Arab terrorist, father of a terrorist, maybe a terrorist himself, who's being treated, would say, they're just doing this because they want to fit into society. But when this person is a proud Jew, identifiable as a Jew, and wears his Jewishness on his sleeve without any apologetics, then this behavior is identifiable for what it really is. I'm not saying put on a show. I'm just saying, let's be aware that our best qualities come from our Jewish culture, from our Jewish tradition, from the Torah. And so when we demonstrate, when we stand up with our Jewish identity proud, it takes guts. But what we end up doing is not only not internalizing anti-Semitism, but we end up fighting anti-Semitism. We fill the hole. Right. And you know what? And even if we don't change, just like you can't bring someone to psychotherapy, some people are sick, and not every broken thing can be fixed. It's not a Jewish thing to say. Right? Jews believe that every broken thing can be fixed. But let's just say not every broken thing can be fixed today. Okay, maybe that's a more Jewish way to say it. At least we will have lived by our principles. At least we will not have participated in anti-Semitism. Yes, Esther.
When I tell you a little story.
Yes.
In the late 1990s, my girlfriend's cousin created a t-shirt in Miami. It said, Cuban, best of both worlds. The mayor of Miami contacted him and said, you have to stop manufacturing that t-shirt, because if you want to ban Jews, that's fine with us, but it makes our government look silly. So you're not allowed to
Oy vey.
manufacture it anymore. And it had a Cuban flag and an Israeli flag.
Right.
And it said Cuban, best of both
Right.
worlds. When we went to see Elliot's surgeon, when he had the brain surgery, the doctor said to me, I was sitting in the back of the room, I made some comments, and he said, you sound so familiar. Are you a Cuban? And I said, yes, how do you know? Well, because I went to school, medical school, with a lot of my friends were Cubans.
Right.
But the mayor.
He said, if you want to ban the Jews, that's fine with me, but you're making us look bad.
Stop the manufacturing of
Wow.
the t-shirt.
Wow. Terrible. So I want to just conclude back to where we started, which is the Rebbe's take on the story of Esther. And remember that Esther is somebody who initially hides her Jewishness. And there comes a moment in which she has to stand up to save the Jewish people. Why was she hiding her Jewishness? Because it was unsafe to be a Jew, she thought. I mean, Mordechai told her this, but it's understandable. This is it, right? Mordechai advised her, yeah? But why? But what was the advice based on? It's not safe to be a Jew. Well, you know what happened? It became really unsafe to be a Jew. And what ended up saving the Jewish people? Somebody standing up and saying, I am a Jew. And so this is just to read it from the middle of the middle paragraph on page 70. May my life. This response is succinctly captured in the words Esther spoke to Achashverosh. She said, may my life be given to me in my petition, my people, my request. To Haman's claim that letting the Jews live was against the king's interest, Esther responded, you should realize that this is the nation from which I, Esther, emerged. It's my nation, the people that produced me, that raised and educated me, and I conduct myself in its ways. You know well that you selected me from all the finest ladies who were themselves selected from 127 of your empire. If so, you have in front of you evidence that the entire complaint is without basis. So the most powerful critique of anti-Semitism, of rishus, of Jew hatred, is two things. Rishus and Jew hatred is confronted by A, goodness, which means that we simply have to be as good as we can because we are in the presence of evil, of wickedness. And B, the only way that Gentiles will come to potentially come to appreciate what Judaism really is when they know Jews for who we really are. So the best thing we can possibly do is be proud and identifiable and good Jews. So enough with this, I won't be too Jewish and you won't be too anti-Semitic. On the contrary, sometimes it's only because I'm trying not to be too Jewish that we allow anti-Semitism to fester. And instead we have to say, I'm going to be pretty darn Jewish, and hopefully you'll see the light eventually. So next week we'll talk about Israel and its anti-Semitism. It was said that Israel is the place that we go to be safe. And right now it seems like Israel is the one place where Jews are most under attack. And how do we understand this? Why is Israel such a source of grief for us when that wasn't what we were hoping for? And how do we speak about Israel in the presence of anti-Semites? So thanks for joining us, and see you next week.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Oh,